Really interesting fight, Matt. At UFC 261, we have Rude Boy Randy Brown taking on Alex Cowboy Oliveira in a fight that was already scheduled to happen, but unfortunately fell out. It seemed like every other weekend these guys were going to fight. And listen, it goes back as far as February, and if you want to go back further than that, well, it didn't. It just goes back to February. But ultimately, a very interesting clash between these two guys, because for Randy Brown, and just as an aside, in my mind's eye, I think, well, he's a good wrestler, and he's a pretty good grappler, and he's a pretty good striker, and if he understood how to check leg kicks, he'd be a title contender. Rude Boy Randy Brown, that good. This is a guy that came into the UFC way back in 2016, and by 2018, he didn't want to be just known as the Dana White's looking for a fight guy. So what happened in 2018? Well, he lost to Nico Price in one of the wildest finishes you've ever seen. He came back and finished Bryan Barberena. He finished sad, tired Warlley Alves, who's got a really big fight coming up. And then he lost to Vicente Luque in a fight, well, you're probably going to lose to Vicente Luque. For Randy Brown, what do you like out of his game?
Just a lot, because you had kind of mentioned it. He is really well-rounded, but I would say he does have some strengths. I would say his wrestling would be the best part of his game. But is Randy Brown a bad striker? Well, no, not at all. Can he keep range as a striker? Yeah, he can. And does he have good jiu-jitsu? He did submit Warlley Alves off of his back. Now, here's the one thing about that Warlley Alves fight. Completely throw that out. And I know I just used that to say that Randy Brown's a good grappler. Warlley Alves was not really fighting that night. I know that's weird, but please go back and watch that performance. Warlley Alves just wasn't there. And I don't want to speculate on anything more than just that, but that was one of those performances that was just a little concerning from Warlley Alves.
You got to follow it up. Like, this is a guy that lost to Covington when he was riding high. This is a guy that just beat Munir Lazez and looked amazing.
Covington. That's the crazy thing about Warlley Alves.
That's what I meant to say.
Exactly. Like, he has a guillotine win over Covington. He's got some great wins, but just in that performance, he just didn't seem all there. And that really is the best way I can describe it. Like, he was in these grappling sequences where he wouldn't even look at Randy Brown. He wouldn't look at his corner. He just seemed totally disinterested. So that's the weird thing about Randy Brown's career. I know he's better than Bryan Barberena, and that's the one thing. I hold Bryan Barberena in very high regard. I think Bryan Barberena is one of those fighters, and I'll kind of compare him to Nico Price. I know they're both in the same division, but both those guys can offer anybody, and I mean anybody, no matter what your ranking is, no matter where you are in the division, they're going to give you a hard fight. They are, and Randy Brown proved that against Bryan Barberena, and Barberena proved it against Vicente Luque. That was, and I don't want to say you held it against Luque, but anytime we talk about Luque, you were always a little concerned. He didn't get dropped by Bryan Barberena, but that's the thing about Barberena. He's dropped Leon Edwards, he's dropped Vicente Luque. If knockdowns count it for knockouts, Bryan Barberena is one of the greatest to ever do it. But when Randy Brown beat Bryan Barberena, at least in my mind, it proved to me that, wow, Randy Brown can be a future contender. Will he ever get to the title? Well, maybe not, but beating a guy like Bryan Barberena does mean that you belong. And you not only belong, but you belong in that 25 to 15 range, where it's going to take more than just one or two losses to get you out of the UFC. And the thing about Randy Brown in this fight is, I think he kind of does everything better than Alex Oliveira. Like, if this was the Alex Oliveira who maybe fought Yancy Medeiros back at 217, I might have a different opinion. If this was the Oliveira who fought Tim Means way back in the day, I might have a different opinion on him. But my issue with Alex Oliveira is that at this stage in his career, he just hasn't made a lot of improvements. It's the weird thing about Oliveira. It feels like in his first little run in the UFC, up until that Cowboy Cerrone fight, and even after that, up until I'd say around that Tim Means fight, he was that new product. He was that new breed. And I would say Alex Oliveira has a very unique style. It's not like Oliveira fights like a lot of other fighters. He's got that weird kind of lunging in style. He's a rangy striker. He's got weird power for being so thin, and he's just kind of good everywhere. But my issue with Oliveira is, I feel like he's one of those fighters where it's just enough film has been out there on him. He's fought so many guys. He's fought so many good fighters, and so many fighters who can really offer you every different wrinkle of MMA that I just think people know what Alex Oliveira is going to do in that cage. And I think Randy Brown's a smart enough fighter that if he can go back and watch any of Alex Oliveira's old fights, I'm sure Randy Brown can replicate a game plan that can beat a guy like Alex Oliveira.
If you look at Alex Oliveira, I mean, you talked about it. He fought KJ Noon's the second fight out. What's KJ good at? Great striker, and he ends up finishing him. And then you look at the names. I mean, maybe there's not a lot of names that you recognize. Obviously, you lost to Donald Cerrone, one of Matt's favorite fighter that we haven't seen in what seems like forever. He beats Will Brooks, has the weird fight against Tim Means, then beats Tim Means, and beats Ryan LaFleur. Then he loses to Yancy Medeiros. And then we go from then. So let's look at it. He beats Carlos Condit in 2018. Carlos is in a weird time in 2018. I mean, since then, he's looked good. But submitting Carlos Condit, that's a good win. You finish Carlo Pedersoli. Carlo just had a weird run in the UFC, straight up. Then he lost to Gunnar Nelson. Gross fight. Then he lost to Mike Perry. Kind of gross in terms of, well, you lost to Mike Perry. Then he loses to Nicholas Dalby in a fight that was It was close, I guess. It was kind of close. He beats Max Griffin in a split decision. I thought Griffin won, but again, I've talked a lot more about Max Griffin recently than I have about Alex Oliveira, which is half true. Then he beats Peter Sabata, which we caught a lot of flack for taking Oliveira to beat Sabata, because what's Sabata good at? Boxing in close. He's a kind of tricky striker. He can work the body. And Alex Oliveira did that thing where I'm super long and I'm just going to dart in and out. And then he fought my favorite fighter from Kazakhstan. He fought Shavkat Rakhmonov. And listen, this is weird, but again, if you watch the Luke Thomases of the world, well, Luke's really high on Shavkat Rakhmonov, and rightfully so. And I remember picking Shavkat Rakhmonov to beat Alex Oliveira, and people said, oh, that's silly. Well, Shavkat's very good, and we want to see him every weekend. So, he loses that fight by first-round guillotine. It's going to happen. Shavkat is very, very well-rounded. Kind of like Randy Brown, but different fighters, but both well-rounded. Then he's booked to take on Randy Brown. Brown's out of the fight. Then he's booked to take on Ramazan Kurmagomedov. And we got excited about that because he fought with PFL. He fought with multiple organizations. I believe we both had Kurmagomedov to win. I also have Randy Brown to win. And originally I had Brown to beat Oliveira, and I still do in this fight. And it has zero to do with great interview that you should check out on our channel. But for Randy Brown, you listen to some of the improvements that he's made, and he's a guy that fight over fight. I don't focus on the bad. I focus on, hey, win or improve. And if I lose, I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm just going to go back into the gym and keep working on it. And he has a boxing background to mix in with good wrestling, to mix in with everything that he has. He trains at a Belmore kickboxing. He's got the Gregor Gillespies of the world. And that's the funny thing. If you look at it, I made the thumbnail, him and Gillespie. He looks like 3 weight classes, 4 or 5 weight classes, maybe even bigger than Gillespie. He's a huge guy for 170. I don't know how he makes the weight class because he's 6'3". He always has a reach advantage. And Oliveira's a tall, rangy guy, but Brown's going to have the size advantage in this fight. There's just so many things that I like out of Randy Brown. For Oliveira, what's he got to do to beat Brown? Maybe submit him? I have a hard time.
For me, I really do think Oliveira's only way is by catching him with some kind of a shot on the feet and then maybe getting this fight to the mat. Maybe not submission. I would more likely go TKO just because Oliveira does have weird power. And that's the best way of describing it. Like you had mentioned too, the weird way he has of striking. In boxing, it's jump in, get carried out. But in MMA, you don't really have to worry about that. And you can mix in the grappling. So for Oliveira, if he can keep this rangy and maybe catch Brown with one of those weird straight shots and hurt him. But other than that, I agree with you. I think Brown's just a little bit better at everything. And the fact that I thought Randy Brown was just a wrestler for a little while. And then I thought he was just a striker. Now I see Randy Brown as that well-rounded MMA fighter who does have a little bit of everything in his toolbox. So I like Randy Brown quite a bit in this fight.
Randy Brown open to -145 favorite. He's now -158. For Alex Oliveira, open to +125. He's a +130. If we have a look at the Topology votes, the surprise for me and you, 936 of them, 70% Brown, 75% by decision. The 30% that have Oliveira, 55% by decision, 20% by submission, 22% by knockout or thereabouts. Yeah, like I said, I like Randy Brown quite a bit more in this fight. Could Oliveira submit him? Sure. Could he outstrike him? Could he actually land a kick? Somebody out there's got to do it. Could Oliveira do it? Maybe. I just don't see it. I like Randy Brown here.
Yeah, I do too. I like Randy Brown quite a bit. I'm actually kind of surprised at where the odds are.
Both of us going with Rude Boy Randy Brown to get the win in this fight. Is Chet Hanks rooting for him? I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. But overall, a great fight. UFC 261. 3 big-time bangers of title fights up at the top. Make sure you tune into the rest of the content for the week. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, Matt, let's get into it.